Your scotch, Mr. Wickham. Karen Taylor set the glass down without looking at him. She'd learned that 3 years ago. Eye contact invited conversation, and conversation with men like Joseph Wickham never ended well. He didn't acknowledge her. His attention stayed on Vincent Greco, his underboss, whose jaw was tight despite the smile he wore to the table. They'd been arguing in the hallway 10 minutes earlier. She'd heard fragments through the kitchen door. Something about moving too fast, about exposure. Karen. Wickham's voice cut through the low hum of the dining room. She turned back, careful to keep her face neutral. Tell me something. He leaned back in his chair, studying her the way someone examines an insect under glass. You've been working here, what, 2 years? 3, sir. 3 years watching men like us. He gestured to his table. 5 men in suits that cost more than her rent, each one looking anywhere but at her. You must have learned something about power, about survival. It wasn't a question. It was a setup. Vincent shifted uncomfortably. One of the other men, Tommy DeMarco, Wickham's enforcer, grinned like he already knew the punchline. Karen felt the weight of it then, the choice hanging in the air between answering and staying silent, between being forgettable and being remembered. I've learned that powerful men ask questions when they already know the answer, she said quietly, or when they don't trust the people who should be giving it to them. The table went still. Wickham's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind his eyes. Calculation, maybe recognition. Smart. He pulled a $100 bill from his wallet, placed it deliberately on the edge of the table. So here's my question, and I want the truth, not the polite version. How do you know when someone's about to betray you? The question hung there, dangerous and specific. Karen could have walked away, should have, but she saw Vincent's knuckles whiten around his whiskey glass, saw the way Tommy's grin had faded, saw the fracture lines in this table that everyone was pretending didn't exist. And she saw something else, something that had lived in her peripheral vision for 3 years, dormant and patient, the scar tissue across Wickham's left hand as he reached for his drink, the same distinctive pattern Michael Chen had described in his final report before someone put a bullet in his head and left her with nothing but a dead partner and a daughter to protect. You don't, Karen said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline now flooding her system. Not until it's already happened. That's what makes betrayal work. You're still trusting them right up until the moment you realize you shouldn't have. She picked up her tray, left the $100 bill where it was. The people closest to us are always the most dangerous, Mr. Wickham, because they're close enough to know exactly where to aim. She walked away before he could respond, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it over the dining room noise. Vincent Greco watched her go, his expression unreadable. Joseph Wickham sat very still, processing what she'd said, or what he thought she'd said. Neither of them knew that in 48 hours, Karen Taylor would dismantle everything Wickham had built, not with violence, not with law enforcement, but with the one thing he couldn't defend against, his own paranoia, carefully cultivated and strategically fed, one quiet conversation at a time. The restaurant sat on the 19th floor of a building that had seen better decades. Not quite luxury, not quite legitimate, the perfect middle ground for Chicago's criminal class to conduct business without drawing federal attention. Sunday evenings belonged to Joseph Wickham. The staff knew the routine. Clear table 7 at 6 p.m. sharp, ensured a corner booth had sight lines to all exits, stock the bar with Macallan 25, Wickham's preferred scotch, keep the private dining room available in case conversations needed to move somewhere without witnesses. Most importantly, be invisible. Karen had perfected invisibility over 3 years. It was a survival skill she'd learned long before she walked into this place wearing a server's uniform and a dead woman's name. Catherine Reynolds had been an FBI analyst, top tier, 7 years tracking organized crime networks, specializing in financial forensics and behavioral psychology. She could map a money laundering operation from credit card receipts and predict a gang war from subtle shifts in territory patrol patterns. That woman died the same night Michael Chen did. Karen Taylor was who remained, a single mother working double shifts to cover rent, invisible to everyone except the 8-year-old girl waiting at home for bedtime stories and the ghost of a partner whose last words were still carved into her memory. The ghost, burned hand, "Tell Sarah I—" He died before finishing the sentence. Sarah Chen had died 6 months ago. Suicide. The note said she couldn't carry the weight anymore. That left Karen carrying it alone. And tonight, for the first time in 3 years, she'd found what she'd been searching for: confirmation. Joseph Wickham wasn't just another mid-level organized crime figure. He was the architect, the ghost, the man who'd orchestrated Michael's death because they'd gotten too close to mapping his network. She'd suspected it for months, tracking patterns in the conversations she overheard, matching names to case files she wasn't supposed to still have. But suspicion wasn't proof. Suspicion couldn't get her daughter to safety or put a killer behind bars. The scar on his hand, though, that was proof. And now she had a choice to make. She could walk away, take Lily, disappear again, keep running the way they had been for 3 years, stay invisible, stay safe. Or she could do what Michael had trained her to do, build a case brick by brick, pattern by pattern, until the structure became undeniable. Except she didn't have a badge anymore, didn't have FBI resources or legal authority, or anyone she could trust inside the system that had gotten Michael killed. What she had was a server's uniform, access to conversations that powerful men thought were private, and 7 years of training in how to read people who spent their lives hiding their intentions. And she had one other thing, something she'd noticed tonight at that table. Joseph Wickham was scared. He hid it well, paranoia disguised as caution, fear disguised as control, but she'd seen it in the way he questioned Vincent, in the sharpness behind that test he'd just given her. He was a man who'd built his empire on violence and intimidation, and somewhere along the way, he'd started wondering which of his own people would be the one to take him down. Karen understood something then, standing in the kitchen doorway watching Wickham's table through the service window. She didn't need to build a case against him. She just needed to help him destroy himself. If you want to know how a waitress with no badge and no backup dismantled one of Chicago's most dangerous crime lords using nothing but patience and psychology, stay with me, because this isn't a story about revenge. It's about watching a man's empire collapse under the weight of the one thing he couldn't control: his own fear. Hit subscribe button now, because what happens in the next 48 hours will show you that real power doesn't come from violence or intimidation. It comes from understanding that the most dangerous weapon you can give your enemy is the truth about themselves. This is the story of how Joseph Wickham lost everything, and he never saw her coming. The Venetian Room wasn't the kind of place that advertised. You either knew about it or you didn't belong there. It occupied the 19th floor of a building that Chicago city planners had forgotten to condemn, too connected to tear down, too compromised to renovate. The elevator required a key card. The windows were tinted dark enough that people on the street never looked up and wondered what happened behind that glass. Sunday evenings, the restaurant transformed into something else entirely. The regular patrons, couples celebrating anniversaries, business lunches that ran long, they cleared out by 5. By 6, the only people left were the ones who understood that some conversations couldn't happen in places with security cameras or liquor licenses that mattered. Joseph Wickham had been holding court here for 8 years. Same table, same corner booth with sightlines to every entrance. Same ritual of power that everyone in Chicago's underworld recognized. If Wickham summoned you to Sunday dinner, you came. And you listened. Tonight, his table held 5 men who'd built their lives around that principle. Vincent Greco sat to his right, 20 years as underboss, the kind of loyalty that should have meant something. But lately, Vincent had been asking questions, pushing back on decisions, suggesting they slow down, consolidate, stop expanding into territories that brought federal attention. Wickham had noticed. Wickham noticed everything. Across from Vincent sat Marcus Romano, the accountant who'd kept Wickham's money clean since the beginning. Quiet, methodical, the kind of man who knew where every dollar lived and died. Too smart for his own good, Wickham sometimes thought. Smart enough to know things that could bury them all. Tommy DeMarco handled enforcement, the muscle that kept Wickham's operations running without interference. He smiled too easily for someone who'd put 17 men in the ground. But that was Tommy's gift, making violence look friendly until the moment it wasn't. Rounding out the table were Paolo and Luca Torino, brothers who ran Wickham's gambling operations. They didn't talk much, which Wickham appreciated. They just executed orders and collected money. Simple, effective, predictable. Except nothing felt predictable anymore. 3 months ago, the FBI had raided 2 of his loan sharking fronts. Last month, a rival crew had moved into his South Side territory without permission, and when Tommy went to handle it, they'd been expecting him. Someone was talking. Someone at this table, or someone close enough to know the details that mattered. Wickham took a slow sip of his scotch, watching Vincent's reflection in the window. The underboss was tense tonight, jaw tight, shoulders rigid, barely touching his drink. Guilty conscience or justified frustration? That was the question keeping Wickham awake at night, the question that made his hand rest too often on the gun holstered beneath his jacket, the question that turned every conversation into a test and every silence into a threat. Respect is earned in blood, but it's kept with fear. The table went still. They'd heard him say it before. It was practically his signature, but tonight it landed differently. Tonight it sounded like a warning. Vincent met his eyes. "We've never had a problem with respect, Joe." "Haven't we?" Wickham leaned back, studying each man at the table. "Because from where I'm sitting, it feels like someone's forgotten what happens when trust breaks." The waitress appeared then, silent as smoke, setting down plates of food no one had ordered yet. Wickham barely glanced at her. Help was furniture in places like this, interchangeable, invisible. That was the rule everyone understood. The staff didn't exist unless you needed them. They moved through the room like ghosts, trained to hear nothing, remember less, and disappear the moment their presence became inconvenient. Wickham built his kingdom on that invisibility, on the certainty that some people mattered and others didn't, and everyone knew which category they occupied. He had no idea he'd just served scotch to the only person in Chicago who could see exactly what he was hiding. But here's what Joseph Wickham didn't understand about invisible people. They see everything, and Karen Taylor had been watching him long enough to know that paranoid men make predictable mistakes. They just need the right push. Stay with me, because what happens next will show you that the most dangerous person in any room is never the one sitting at the head of the table. Drop a comment if you've ever been underestimated by someone who had no idea who they were really dealing with. And hit that subscribe button, because this story is about to show you what happens when the person you never bothered to see becomes the only one who truly understands you. Karen Taylor's hands didn't shake anymore when she poured drinks for men who'd killed people. That reflex had died somewhere around month 6, buried under the weight of necessity and the simple fact that fear was a luxury she couldn't afford. Her daughter needed to eat, needed a roof, needed a mother who came home at night instead of ending up in a ditch because she'd flinched at the wrong moment in front of the wrong man. So Karen learned not to flinch. But 3 years ago, she'd had a different name and a different life. Catherine Reynolds had worn a badge and carried a weapon and spent her days mapping criminal networks that stretched across state lines like spider webs. Intricate, invisible, deadly if you touched the wrong thread. She'd been good at it, exceptional according to her supervisor. She could look at a money transfer and see the organization behind it, could listen to a wiretap and predict the next move before the criminals themselves knew they'd make it. 7 years of that work, 7 years of building cases that put dangerous people behind bars, and she'd started to believe she was making a difference. Then she met Michael Chen. He was 38, a senior analyst with 15 years in organized crime. Patient, thorough, the kind of mentor who taught you to trust your instincts while questioning every assumption. He had a wife who packed his lunch every morning and 2 kids who thought their dad sold insurance. Michael was the one who first identified the pattern, a phantom operator moving through Chicago's underworld, coordinating crews that never met, laundering money through businesses that folded before anyone could trace them, orchestrating hits with such precision that nobody even knew there was a puppet master pulling strings. They'd called him the Ghost. For 18 months, Kate and Michael hunted him. Late nights in the office, cross-referencing financial records with surveillance footage, building a profile of someone they'd never seen. The Ghost was paranoid, careful, never left evidence, never stayed in one place long enough to establish a pattern. But Michael found something, a detail so small that everyone else had missed it, a burn scar on a partial fingerprint lifted from a crime scene 6 years earlier, distinctive enough to identify if they could ever match it to a person. They were close, so close Kate could feel it. Then someone inside the bureau leaked their location. She remembered the warehouse, the smell of oil and rust, Michael's voice saying they should wait for backup, her own certainty that they couldn't risk losing this lead. She remembered the muzzle flash, the way Michael's expression changed from determination to shock to something softer, almost peaceful as he collapsed against her. "The Ghost," he'd whispered, blood soaking through his shirt. "Burned hand. Tell Sarah He died before he could finish. Kate barely made it out, bullet wound in her shoulder, half blind from smoke, running through alleys until she collapsed in a stranger's yard. The hospital, the investigation, the questions that felt more like accusations. How did they know you'd be there? Who else knew about the operation? Are you sure you weren't compromised? The Bureau never said she was complicit. They just stopped trusting her, stopped assigning her cases, started treating her like a liability instead of an asset. Sarah Chen stopped returning her calls after the funeral. 6 months later, Kate found out why. Sarah couldn't get out of bed anymore, couldn't take care of her own kids. The grief had swallowed her whole, and no amount of therapy or medication could pull her back out. Kate wanted to help, wanted to fix it, but she had a 5-year-old daughter at home and a target on her back from whoever had leaked that warehouse location. So she made a choice she'd regret every single day for the rest of her life. She walked away, changed her name, changed her appearance, moved to Chicago, the city where the Ghost likely operated, where she could disappear into the background noise of 8 million people and maybe, possibly, find the man who destroyed everything. The Venetian room wasn't random. Criminal networks needed neutral ground, and this place had been whispered about in enough intercepted conversations that Kate knew it mattered. So she applied for a server position, invented a backstory about a messy divorce and shared custody, and became exactly what people expected, a struggling single mother working double shifts to make rent. Nobody looked twice at her. Nobody wondered why she paid such close attention to conversations at corner tables, or why she could remember every face that walked through that door, or why she kept detailed notes in an apartment that should have been too expensive for someone making minimum wage. For 3 years, she watched, listened, built profiles the way Michael had taught her, and tonight she'd finally seen it. Joseph Wickham's left hand reaching for his scotch, the scar tissue catching the light for just a moment, a distinctive pattern to match the partial print from that crime scene 6 years earlier. The Ghost had a face now, and he had no idea she'd been looking for him. You ever carry a weight so heavy that it changes who you are? Karen's been carrying Michael's death for 3 years, and tonight she finally found the man responsible. But revenge isn't simple when you've got a daughter waiting at home and no backup except your own broken heart. If you've ever had to choose between justice and safety, drop a comment and subscribe, because what Karen does next will show you that some debts can only be paid in pieces, one careful move at a time. This story is just beginning, and trust me, you don't want to miss what happens when a ghost finally becomes visible. The moment happened so quietly that anyone else would have missed it. Wickham reached for his scotch, and his cuff pulled back just far enough to expose the inside of his left wrist. The scar tissue caught the light, a burn pattern that spread across his hand like a map of something violent and permanent. Karen's breath stopped in her throat. She knew that pattern, had stared at the evidence photo for hours after Michael died, memorizing every detail because it was the only piece of him left, the only proof that the ghost was real and not just a phantom they'd invented to explain away their failure. The ghost, burned hand. Michael's final words, whispered with blood on his lips and his life draining away in her arms. This was him. Joseph Wickham, the man sitting 3 feet away, drinking scotch she'd poured, laughing with his crew like he hadn't orchestrated the death of the best person she'd ever known. Karen's hand tightened on her serving tray. Her training kicked in, years of conditioning that said stay calm, don't react, gather evidence before you move. But underneath that training was something raw, rage, grief, the kind of pain that 3 years hadn't dulled even slightly. He was right there, the answer to every sleepless night, every nightmare where she watched Michael die again, every moment she'd spent wondering if Sarah Chen's children would ever understand why their mother couldn't survive losing their father. And he had no idea who she was. Karen had changed everything after that night. Cut her hair, lost 15 pounds she couldn't afford to lose, traded her tailored suits for server uniforms. Catherine Reynolds had been confident, sharp-eyed, the kind of woman people noticed. Karen Taylor was designed to be forgotten the moment you looked away. It had worked. Wickham didn't recognize her, didn't see anything except another underpaid worker who existed to refill his glass and disappear. But she saw him now, really saw him. And with that recognition came a choice that felt like standing at the edge of a cliff. She could walk away, take Lily, leave Chicago tonight, start over somewhere else, keep her daughter safe, keep herself alive. Michael was dead, had been dead for 3 years, and no amount of justice would bring him back. Or she could stay, risk everything, try to finish what Michael had started, knowing that if she failed, Lily would be the one paying the price. The FBI wasn't an option. Someone inside had leaked their location once before, someone with access to case files and operational details. Whoever that person was, they were still there, still protecting Wickham. Going through official channels would just get her killed faster. No, if this was going to work, it had to be different, quieter, something Wickham wouldn't see coming until it was too late. Karen watched him across the dining room, studying the tension in his shoulders, the way his gaze kept drifting to Vincent Greco. The underboss looked uncomfortable tonight, almost defensive, and Wickham looked like a man waiting for betrayal. Paranoid, unstable, powerful enough to be dangerous, but vulnerable enough to be manipulated. She'd heard them arguing earlier, before service started. Vincent's voice saying something about exposure, about moving too fast. Wickham's response had been sharp enough to cut. This man had built his empire on fear and control. But fear was a double-edged weapon. It kept people in line, but it also made you see threats that didn't exist, made you question loyalty that should have been certain. Karen thought about Michael, about Sarah Chen, who'd stopped eating, stopped sleeping, stopped wanting to live because the weight of grief had been too much to carry alone. She thought about Lily, 8 years old now, asking questions about why they moved so much, why Mommy sometimes woke up crying in the middle of the night. And she made a decision that felt less like courage and more like stepping off that cliff and hoping she'd learn to fly on the way down. When Wickham asked his question, "How do I know who to trust?" Karen didn't look away. She looked directly at him and told the truth. Not all of it, just enough to plant a seed in soil that was already fertile with suspicion. Just enough to show him that sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one you never bothered to see. If you're listening right now, help me prove something wrong. My mother once said I wouldn't even reach 1,000 subscribers, but I believe stories like this deserve to be heard. If this story moved you, support the channel and help show that these stories matter. Because what Karen just did, choosing to speak instead of run, that's the moment everything changes. She's betting her life and her daughter's future on the belief that monsters destroy themselves if you just give them the right mirror. Comment below if you've ever had to make a choice between safety and justice. Hit subscribe because the next 48 hours will show you exactly what happens when you weaponize a guilty man's conscience. Stay with me. This is where the fall begins. Karen met his eyes when she answered. Not defiant. Defiance would have been a mistake with a man like Wickham. Just steady. The kind of calm that came from having nothing left to lose. You want advice, Mr. Wickham? Her voice carried just far enough to reach the table, but not the rest of the room. Intimate, like she was sharing a secret instead of issuing a challenge. The laughter died first, then the smiles. 5 men who'd spent years reading threats suddenly couldn't decide if they'd just heard one. Wickham leaned forward, his scotch forgotten. I'm listening. The hardest thing about power, Karen said, choosing each word like placing stones across a river, is knowing who deserves your trust and who's been sharpening the knife while you weren't looking. Something shifted in Wickham's expression, not anger, recognition, like she'd touched a wound he'd been trying to ignore. Loyalty is loudest when it's fake, she continued, her tone almost conversational. Real loyalty doesn't announce itself, doesn't need constant proof. It just exists, quietly, until the moment you need it most. She let her gaze drift, just for a second, toward Vincent Greco. It was subtle enough to be accidental, calculated enough to be deliberate. Wickham followed her eyes, saw his underboss sitting rigid in his chair, jaw tight, hands clenched around a whiskey glass he hadn't touched in 10 minutes. Vincent felt the weight of that attention and looked up, confused. Joe? But Wickham didn't answer. His mind was already racing, replaying every conversation they'd had in the past month, every time Vincent had questioned a decision, every moment of hesitation that Wickham had written off as caution, but could just as easily be something else. Karen set down the scotch she'd been holding, picked up the $100 bill from the table with fingers that didn't shake despite the adrenaline flooding her system. The people closest to you, Mr. Wickham, they're either your greatest strength or your fatal wound. Usually you don't know which until it's too late. She folded the bill once, twice, slipped it into her apron pocket. Thank you for the tip. I hope my advice is worth it. Then she walked away, leaving Wickham staring at Vincent like he was seeing him for the first time. The table sat in silence. Tommy DeMarco glanced between his boss and the underboss, trying to gauge whether he should say something or keep his mouth shut. Marcus Romano studied his drink like it held answers. The Torino brothers looked uncomfortable in a way that had nothing to do with the food getting cold. Vincent broke first. Joe, what? How long have you been with me? Wickham's voice was quiet, dangerous. 20 years, you know that. Do I? Because 20 years should mean I don't have to wonder whether you're the one feeding information to the feds. 20 years should mean I don't wake up at 3 in the morning asking myself if my underboss is the reason we've lost 2 operations in 3 months. Vincent's face went pale. You think I'm the leak? You think someone is, and that waitress just looked at you like she knows something I don't. She's a waitress, Joe. She doesn't know anything. But Wickham's paranoia was already blooming, fed by months of pressure and the perfectly placed words of a woman who understood exactly how to water it. Karen pushed through the kitchen doors and let herself breathe. Her hands were shaking now, delayed reaction, adrenaline crash, the weight of what she'd just done settling into her bones. Kate. The voice came from her left. Marcus Stone stood by the bar, nursing a coffee you didn't seem interested in drinking. 62 years old, silver hair, the kind of weathered face that came from 3 decades of police work in a city that chewed up good cops and spat out the shells. He'd been Michael Chen's mentor before he'd been hers, had taught both of them that organized crime wasn't about violence, it was about psychology, understanding what made dangerous men tick and using that knowledge to dismantle them piece by piece. Karen hadn't spoken to him in 2 years, not since he'd tried to convince her to stop searching for the ghost and focus on keeping Lily safe. "Don't do this," Marcus said quietly, crossing the kitchen to stand beside her. "Not like this." "I didn't ask for your opinion." "No, but Michael would have." He studied her face, reading the determination there. "You found him. That's why you're still here. That's why you just planted a seed in Joseph Wickham's head that's going to get people killed." Karen's jaw tightened. "Good. Kate, his paranoia is his weakness," she said, her voice steady despite the emotion churning beneath it. "I'm just showing him the mirror, letting him see what's already there." Marcus shook his head. "You're playing with fire, kid, and fire doesn't care who started it. It just burns." Karen thought about Michael bleeding out in her arms, about Sarah Chen's funeral, where her children had asked why Daddy wasn't coming home, about 3 years of running and hiding and pretending to be someone else while the ghost walked free. She looked Marcus in the eye. "Good. Let it burn. If you're listening right now, help me prove something wrong. My mother once said I wouldn't even reach 1,000 subscribers, but I believe stories like this deserve to be heard. If this story moved you, support the channel and help show that these stories matter. Because Karen just lit a match in a room full of gasoline, and there's no putting it out now. She's betting that Wickham's fear will do what the FBI couldn't, tear his empire apart from the inside. But Marcus is right about one thing. Fire doesn't discriminate, and innocent people are about to get burned. Drop a comment if you've ever had to make a choice where every option came with a price. Hit subscribe because what happens next will show you that revenge isn't clean, justice isn't simple, and sometimes the cost of winning is higher than you ever imagined. Stay with me. The fall has only just begun. Karen waited until 2 in the morning before she moved. The parking garage beneath the Venetian room was empty except for Wickham's black Mercedes and the security camera that had been broken for 6 months. She'd watched the maintenance reports. Nobody bothered fixing things in a building owned by shell companies that laundered money. The envelope was thin, professional, the kind of anonymous tip that looked legitimate because she'd spent 7 years learning how to make evidence convincing. Inside were bank statements for an offshore account in the Cayman Islands, Vincent Greco's name on the paperwork, deposits that corresponded with dates when Wickham's operations had moved significant cash. The account was real. She'd found it during her 3 years of surveillance. What the statements didn't show was that every person at Wickham's table had similar accounts. It was how they protected assets from seizure, standard practice in organized crime. But, presented alone, without context, it looked like Vincent was skimming, stealing from the man he'd served for 20 years. Karen slipped the envelope under Wickham's windshield wiper and walked away before she could change her mind. The next morning, she worked the early shift, listened to conversations at the bar while she refilled coffee cups and cleared plates. The crew came in around noon, smaller group today, tension thick enough to taste. Tommy DeMarco was talking about federal pressure, how they'd lost another front last week. Someone said it felt like the feds knew things they shouldn't. Karen drifted past their table, casual as breathing. Vincent seemed nervous last night, didn't he? She said it to no one in particular, let it hang in the air like cigarette smoke. Paolo Torino glanced up. "You noticed that too?" "I'm a waitress," Karen said with a small smile. "I notice everything. It's how I survive." She moved away before they could ask questions. Let them wonder what else she'd noticed, what else she might have seen. By evening, the whispers had grown teeth. Someone mentioned that the feds offered deals to people willing to cooperate. Someone else said Vincent had been asking too many questions about expanding into territories that brought federal attention. Suddenly, every moment of caution looks like preparation for betrayal. Wickham heard the whispers, read the bank statements, watched Vincent's denials with eyes that saw guilt in every gesture. The confrontation happened in the back office. Karen didn't witness it directly, but she heard the shouting, heard Vincent's voice rising in panic, confusion, desperation. "Joe, I swear to God, I don't know what you're talking about. 20 years, Vincent? 20 years and you betray me? I'm not. Joe, please, just listen." But paranoid men don't listen. They protect themselves from threats they've already decided are real. Vincent Greco died in his home 2 nights later. Single gunshot to the back of the head. Clean. Professional. Tommy DeMarco's specialty. Karen heard about it on the morning news. The report called it a targeted killing, likely organized crime related. They showed a photo of Vincent smiling at a family barbecue, mentions that he left behind a wife and 2 teenage sons. She sat on her bathroom floor and shook so hard her teeth chattered. Vincent had been loyal, had spent 20 decades building his life around Joseph Wickham's empire, and she'd killed him with nothing more than suspicion and a forged bank statement. "Mommy?" Lily's voice came through the bathroom door, small, worried, 8 years old and already too familiar with the sound of her mother crying. Karen wiped her face, forced her voice steady. "Yes, baby? Are you okay?" No. She wasn't okay. She'd crossed a line she couldn't uncross, had become the thing she'd spent 7 years fighting against, someone willing to destroy innocent lives in pursuit of a goal. But she couldn't tell her daughter that, couldn't explain that Mommy had just gotten someone killed, that justice had a body count, and she was the one tallying it now. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just tired. Go back to bed." Lily's footsteps retreated down the hallway. Karen stayed on the bathroom floor, staring at her reflection in the toilet water, and wondered at what point she'd stopped being Catherine Reynolds and started being someone Michael wouldn't recognize. This is the moment most stories won't show you, the cost of revenge. Vincent Greco was loyal for 20 years, and Karen destroyed him with a lie. She's not the hero anymore. She's not even sure she's the good guy, but she's gone too far to stop now, and Wickham's empire is starting to crack. If you've ever done something you can't take back, drop a comment. If the story is making you feel things you didn't expect, hit that subscribe button, because we need to talk about what happens when justice starts looking like murder and the person you're becoming scares you more than the monster you're hunting. Stay with me. It gets darker before it gets light. Vincent's death fractured something fundamental in Wickham's organization. The crew had operated for 2 decades on a single principle. Loyalty meant survival. Betray Wickham and you died. But stay loyal, follow orders, keep your mouth shut, and you'd be protected. That promise had held the empire together through federal investigations, territorial wars, and the constant pressure of life in Chicago's underworld. Now that promise felt hollow. If Wickham could kill Vincent, 20 years of service, 20 years of brotherhood, then nobody was safe. Suddenly, every man at that table was doing the math, calculating their own vulnerability, wondering if they'd be next. Tommy DeMarco handled the execution, but even he looked shaken afterward. Marcus Romano stopped showing up to Sunday dinners entirely. The Torino brothers started hedging their bets, reaching out to rival families, preparing exit strategies. Business suffered. Deals that should have been simple fell apart because partners didn't trust Wickham's stability anymore. Territory that had been secure for years suddenly had rival crews testing the boundaries, sensing weakness the way predators smell blood. Karen watched it happen from her invisible position behind the bar, and she fed the fire. Marcus Stone had tried to stay out of it after their conversation in the kitchen, tried to convince himself that what Kate was doing wasn't his responsibility. But he'd loved Michael Chen like a son, and he owed his memory more than cowardice. So when Kate came to him with specific intelligence about Wickham's operations, Marcus made calls to people he still trusted in the Bureau, people who hadn't been part of the original investigation, people who couldn't have been the leak. The gambling house on Ashland Avenue went down first, federal raid at 2 a.m, 37 people arrested, $4 million seized, records confiscated that connected directly to Wickham's money laundering network. 2 weeks later, they hit the waste management company that served as his primary front. Tax fraud, environmental violations, racketeering charges that would take years to untangle. Each operation was perfectly timed to maximize Wickham's paranoia. Each raid happened after internal conversations that only his crew should have known about. Someone was talking. Someone had to be. Wickham stopped sleeping, stopped trusting, started seeing betrayal in every delayed response, every nervous glance, every moment of hesitation. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. Karen found it in her mailbox, plain white envelope, no return address. Inside was a single piece of notebook paper covered in handwriting that looked like it had been written by someone whose hands wouldn't stop shaking. Dear Catherine Reynolds, I don't know if you still use that name or if you even remember me. Sarah Chen, Michael's wife, his widow. I'm writing this because I can't do this anymore. 3 years of trying to be strong for the kids, 3 years of pretending that life still matters when the person who made it matter is gone. I'm so tired. I wanted you to know that I never blamed you. Michael loved working with you. He said you were going to change things, make the world safer. But the world isn't safer. It's just emptier. Michael's children ask about him every day, and I don't know what to tell them anymore. I don't know how to explain that their father died chasing a ghost while I'm here dying because he's gone. I never got closure, never got justice, never got to look the person responsible in the eye and ask why my husband's life was worth less than their freedom. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. But I can't carry this anymore. Please tell the kids their mother loved them. Tell them I tried. The letter was dated 3 weeks ago. Karen called the number she still had for Sarah's sister, heard the words she'd been dreading. Funeral last Tuesday, private serviced. Sarah's children were living with their aunt now, trying to piece together a life from the wreckage their mother had left behind. Karen sat on her apartment floor and read the letter again and again until the words blurred and her hands stopped shaking and something cold settled into the hollow space where her guilt had been. Vincent Grieco had been innocent. She'd killed him anyway. But Wetzikum had destroyed Michael, had destroyed Sarah, had orphaned 2 children who would grow up knowing their parents' love hadn't been strong enough to survive his cruelty. Whatever guilt Karen carried for Vincent's death, it paled beside the weight of what Wickham had done, and what he'd keep doing if someone didn't stop him. She went to work that night with Sarah's letter folded in her pocket and a clarity that felt like ice water in her veins. Wickham was at his usual table. The crew had shrunk to 3 men now, Tommy, who followed orders, and the Torino brothers, who looked increasingly uncomfortable with the trajectory of things. Karen brought his scotch without being summoned, set it down with steady hands. Wickham looked up at her, and something in his expression had changed, sharpened. You. Sir? That night, what you said about betrayal, about trust. His eyes narrowed. How did you know about Vincent? Karen let silence hang between them for 3 full seconds, long enough to be noticeable, short enough to seem natural. I didn't know anything, Mr. Wickham. You asked for advice. I gave it. Did you? He studied her face like he was reading code, because Vincent's dead now, and my business is falling apart, and I can't help but wonder if that's coincidence. I'm a waitress, Karen said calmly. I serve drinks and clear plates. Whatever's happening in your life has nothing to do with me. She turned to leave. Wait. Karen paused, looked back. Wickham's jaw worked. You said something else that night about the people closest to you being the most dangerous. I did? So tell me, his voice dropped to something dangerous. Who should I be watching? Karen met his eyes, saw the paranoia eating him alive from the inside, saw a man who'd built everything on fear and was now drowning in it. If I may, Mr. Wickham, the people who betrayed you probably aren't the ones you suspect. Real betrayal doesn't announce itself. It doesn't make noise or draw attention. It hides in plain sight, right under your nose. Sometimes it's the person you'd never think to question. She walked away before he could respond, left him sitting at that table, staring at the two men he had left, wondering which one of them was the knife aimed at his back. If you're listening right now, help me prove something wrong. My mother once said I wouldn't even reach 1,000 subscribers, but I believe stories like this deserve to be heard. If this story moved you, support the channel and help show that these stories matter. Because Sarah Chan died without ever getting justice, and her children will grow up orphaned because one man decided his empire was worth more than their father's life. Karen's not the hero anymore. She's something colder, sharper, more dangerous. And Wickham's starting to realize that the most terrifying enemy isn't the one you can see. It's the one who's been invisible all along. Comment if you've ever watched someone destroy themselves. Hit subscribe button now, because what happens next will show you that paranoia is a slow poison, and Karen's been feeding it to him one drop at a time. Stay with me. The empire's about to collapse. Wickham stopped answering his phone after midnight, stopped meeting with his lawyer, started carrying 2 guns instead of 1, and seeing threats in shadows that had always been empty. His accountant tried to schedule a meeting to discuss the seized assets and found himself accused of cooperation with federal investigators. The man had worked for Wickham for 12 years. Now he was gone. Not dead, just terrified enough to disappear before Tommy DeMarco came knocking. The Torino brothers made their move quietly, reached out to a crew operating on the north side, negotiated safe passage, and vanished before Wickham could decide they were the leak. Their gambling operations collapsed within days, absorbed by rivals who'd been waiting years for an opening. Tommy stayed, partly out of loyalty, mostly out of fear that running would make him look guilty, and guilty men ended up in shallow graves. Wickham sat alone in the Venetian room on a Thursday night, staring at a table meant for 6 that now held only 1. His empire was disintegrating in real time, and he couldn't stop it because he didn't know who to trust. Couldn't know. Everyone looked like a threat when paranoia was the only lens you had left. Karen watched him from across the room and felt nothing. That absence of feeling terrified her more than anything else. She went home that night to her apartment, small, anonymous, the kind of place designed for people who didn't want to be noticed. Lily was asleep in the bedroom they shared, 8 years old, curled around a stuffed bear that had seen better days, dreaming dreams that didn't include dead FBI agents or organized crime bosses or mothers who'd become killers in the name of justice. Karen sat on the bathroom floor with her service weapon in her lap. She'd kept the gun after leaving the bureau. Illegal, technically, but leaving meant walking away from protection, and she'd needed something between her daughter and the world that had already taken so much. The gun felt heavier tonight, like it knew what she'd done with information that was just as deadly. Vincent Greco's widow had been on the news yesterday. The reporter asked about her husband's death, whether she had any idea who might have wanted him dead or why. "My husband was innocent," she'd said, voice breaking around the edges. "Whatever they're saying about him, whatever rumors, he was loyal. He would have died for Joseph Wickham, and now he has." Karen had watched that interview 3 times, memorized the pain in the woman's face, the way her sons sat beside her, teenagers trying to look strong while their world fell apart. She'd done that, put that grief in their eyes, orchestrated their father's death with nothing more than forged bank statements and strategic whispers. The knock on her door came at 1 in the morning. Karen opened it to find Marcus Stone standing in the hallway, looking older than she'd ever seen him, tired in a way that went deeper than lack of sleep. "Kate," he said quietly, We need to talk." She let him in, made coffee neither of them would drink, sat across from him at the small kitchen table while he chose his words carefully. "You need to stop," Marcus said finally. "Before you cross a line you can't come back from." "I already crossed it. Vincent's dead. And Wickham's dying, slowly, painfully. You're destroying him exactly the way you planned." Marcus leaned forward. "So the question isn't whether you can do this, it's whether you should, whether Michael would have wanted this version of you." Karen's hands tightened around her coffee mug. "He destroyed Michael, destroyed Sarah, orphaned their children, and the system did nothing. The FBI did nothing. So I had to do what? Become him?" Marcus reached across the table. "Kate, you're not eating, you're not sleeping, you're sitting alone in the dark with a loaded weapon, questioning whether you're still human. That's not justice. That's self-destruction dressed up in a badge you don't wear anymore." Karen looked toward Lily's bedroom door, thought about her daughter asking why Mommy cried at night, thought about the lies she'd told to explain the tension, the fear, the weight of carrying death in your pocket and calling it righteousness. "I don't know how to stop," she admitted. "I don't know how to look at Michael's grave and tell him I walked away before finishing what we started." "Michael's dead, Kate. He doesn't need you to avenge him. His kids need you to help them survive him being gone. Sarah's kids need someone to show them that grief doesn't have to end in more death." Marcus squeezed her hand. "And Lily needs her mother back, the real one, not this ghost." Karen closed her eyes, saw Vincent's widow on television, saw Sarah Chan's letter, saw Michael bleeding out while she begged him to hold on just a little longer, saw Lily sleeping in the next room, innocent of everything her mother had become. "He's paying," Marcus said quietly, "every day. You've taken his empire, his crew, his peace of mind. You've made him live in fear the way all his victims did. That's more than most monsters ever get." "It's not enough." "Maybe not, but if you kill him or make him kill himself, you become exactly what you're fighting against, and Lily loses you too." The choice sat between them like a third presence. Stop now, walk away, try to salvage whatever humanity remained, or finish it. Make Wickham pay in full, become the thing she'd spent 7 years hunting. Karen thought about Michael's hands, gentle despite all the violence he'd seen. Thought about Sarah's letter, "I never got closure, never got justice." Thought about Vincent's sons, growing up without a father because Karen had needed a weapon and his life was convenient. She opened her eyes, made a decision that felt like stepping off a ledge. "I'll finish this," she said, "but not with murder. I'll give him to the law, the right way, through evidence and testimony and everything we should have done 3 years ago." Marcus studied her face. "You sure?" "No, but Michael didn't die so I could become a killer. He died trying to protect people. So that's what I'm going to do. Protect Lily, protect myself, and make sure Wickham pays without adding more bodies to his count, including her own soul. Sometimes the hardest person to save is yourself. Karen just made the choice to stop being the monster, but Wickham's not done yet, and finishing this without becoming him might be the hardest thing she's ever done. If you've ever had to choose between revenge and redemption, drop a comment. Hit subscribe because what happens next will show you that closure doesn't come from violence. It comes from choosing to be better than the person who hurt you. Stay with me. The end game is here, and it's going to hurt before it heals. Wickham killed Marcus Romano on a Wednesday afternoon in broad daylight. The accountant had made the mistake of suggesting they cooperate with federal investigators, cut a deal before the walls closed in completely. Wickham heard cooperate and saw betrayal, put 2 bullets in Marcus's chest in the parking lot of a restaurant that had nothing to do with their business. Security cameras caught everything. 3 days later, Tommy DeMarco disappeared. Not dead, at least not yet, but gone in the way that meant he'd seen what was coming and decided survival mattered more than loyalty. Wickham put a price on his head, $50,000 to whoever brought Tommy back alive so Wickham could handle him personally. Nobody collected. Tommy had 20 years of knowing how Wickham operated, and he'd used that knowledge to vanish so completely it was like he'd never existed. Wickham was alone now. No crew, no buffer between himself and the consequences of 3 decades of violence. And he was making mistakes. The kind of mistakes that left evidence, bodies in public places, financial transfers that connected directly to his name, patterns that broke from years of careful operation, replaced by the erratic decisions of a man who couldn't tell the difference between threats and shadows anymore. Karen watched it happen and felt something close to pity. Marcus Stone made the calls to people he trusted in the bureau, young agents who hadn't been part of the original investigation into Michael's death, people who'd built their careers on integrity instead of compromise. The evidence Karen had gathered over 3 years, recordings, financial documents, witness testimony from people brave enough or broken enough to talk, all of it went to those agents. Clean chain of custody, airtight documentation, the kind of case that couldn't be buried by corruption because there were too many eyes watching. A task force formed, federal, state, local, coordinated by people Wickham had never thought to bribe because they'd been too junior, too idealistic, too beneath his notice. The raids happened at 4 a.m. on a Friday. Simultaneous strikes across every property Wickham owned or operated. His legitimate fronts, the real estate company, the waste management business, the restaurant supply chain, his illegal operations, gambling houses, loan sharking networks, money laundering channels that had moved billions over 3 decades. Agents found bodies buried in construction sites, found records connecting Wickham to 17 murders, including Michael Chen's. Found evidence of corruption reaching into the police department, the courts, the city council. Found enough to put Joseph Wickham away for the rest of his life, twice over. But they didn't find Wickham. He'd gotten a warning, not from anyone on the inside, just the instinct that came from living paranoid for so long that you learned to smell danger before it arrived. He ran, left everything behind except the clothes he was wearing and a gun he'd owned since his father handed down the family business. Chicago became a manhunt. Police at every exit point, FBI watching train stations and airports, U.S. Marshals coordinating with informants who suddenly found cooperation more attractive than prison time. Wickham's empire collapsed in 48 hours. Everything he'd built, everyone who'd worked for him, gone. Some arrested, some cooperating, some just disappeared before the net closed. The ghost had finally become visible, and visibility meant vulnerability. Karen knew where he'd go before the FBI did. She'd spent 3 years studying the way criminals thought, and she understood something that federal training manuals never taught. Desperate men always returned to the places that felt safe, even when those places weren't. The Venetian Room had been Wickham's kingdom, his territory, the one place in Chicago where he'd held absolute power for 8 years. He had money hidden there, emergency cash in the wine cellar, tucked behind a false wall that he thought nobody knew about. Karen had watched him check it 6 times over the years, watched him count the bills, reassure himself that he had an escape plan if everything went wrong. Everything had gone wrong, and predictable men made predictable choices. She waited in the restaurant alone, sitting at his usual table like she had every right to be there. The staff was gone, cleared out after the raids when the health department had discovered violations that shut the place down. The building was empty, except for Karen and the ghosts of 3 years' worth of conversations she'd served drinks through. Marcus was outside with the task force, parked 3 blocks away, ready to move in the moment Wickham appeared. They'd argued about whether Karen should be there at all, whether the risk was worth it, whether she needed this confrontation, or if she was just chasing closure that didn't exist. Karen made her case simply.
He knows my face, he'll talk to me, and you need him to confess on record. She wore a wire under her server uniform, carried no weapon. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about finishing what Michael had started, the right way, with evidence and testimony and justice that came from the law instead of the barrel of a gun. Lily was safe with Marcus's wife, far away from this, protected from the cost of what her mother had become and what she was trying to stop being. The back door opened at 2 a.m. Wickham moved like a shadow, gun drawn, scanning for threats that experience told him had to be there. He saw Karen sitting at his table and froze. "Hello, Mr. Wickham," she said quietly. "I've been expecting you." 3 years of hunting, 3 years of waiting, and now they're alone in the place where it started, predator and prey, except neither one is sure anymore which role they're playing. If you've made it this far, drop a comment about what justice means to you. Hit subscribe because what happens next will show you that sometimes the most powerful weapon you have isn't violence or evidence, it's just the truth, spoken out loud by someone who refused to stay invisible. Stay with me. This is where everything ends, or begins again.
Wickham moved through the kitchen like he'd done it 1,000 times before, checking corners, testing shadows, the muscle memory of a man who'd spent 30 years expecting ambush. He found Karen sitting at table 7, his table. 2 glasses of scotch poured and waiting like she was hosting a meeting instead of ending a war. The gun came up fast, professional, steady despite everything he'd lost in the past 48 hours. "Who the hell are you?" Karen didn't flinch. She'd faced men with guns before, had held Michael while he bled out from one. Fear was a currency she'd spent years ago, and the account was empty now. Someone who's been waiting 3 years for this conversation. She gestured to the empty chair across from her. "Sit down, Mr. Wickham, or should I call you the ghost?" His face changed, recognition blooming into rage, then settling into something colder, more calculated. "The Waitress," he said it like he was tasting the words, testing them for poison. "Your FBI." "Was." Karen stood slowly, hands visible, non-threatening, removed her apron and set it on the table like she was shedding a costume. "My real name is Catherine Reynolds, Special Agent Catherine Reynolds. You killed my partner 3 years ago, Michael Chen. You remember him?" Wickham's gun didn't waver, but something flickered in his eyes, memory or regret, or just the calculation of a man realizing he'd underestimated a threat. "You're supposed to be dead. The FBI said you went rogue after Chen died." "I did." Karen's voice stayed level, clinical. "Went rogue to find you, and I did. That scar on your hand, the burn pattern from the warehouse fire 6 years ago, Michael described it before he died. The ghost. Burned hand. Those were his last words. I've been looking at that scar every Sunday for 3 years, waiting for the right moment." Wickham's jaw tightened. "So you killed Vincent, destroyed my organization, made me paranoid enough to tear apart everything I built?" "Yes." "Why not just shoot me, turn me in? You're FBI, you had options." "Because the FBI had a leak. Someone told us we were coming to that warehouse. Someone got Michael killed." Karen picked up one of the scotch glasses, took a slow sip. "I couldn't trust the system, so I became the system, used your paranoia as a weapon, watched you destroy yourself one decision at a time." Wickham stared at her. Then, slowly, he lowered himself into the chair across from her, gun still aimed, but no longer quite so steady. "Vincent was loyal," he said quietly, 20 years, and I killed him for nothing." "I know, just like Michael Chen was loyal, and you killed him anyway. So tell me, Mr. Wickham, which death was justified, or are they all just bodies we stack up and call necessary?" The question hung between them like smoke. Wickham's gun hand started to shake. "You want revenge, blood for blood. So take it, shoot me, make it even."
"That's what you do," Karen said. "That's all you understand. Violence, control, fear. But I'm not you, Wickham." She pushed the second glass of scotch across the table toward him. "I could have killed you 12 times, Poison in your drink, a bullet when you weren't looking, made it look like one of your own men finally got tired of the paranoia. But I didn't, because Michael didn't die so I could become a killer. He died trying to protect people, so that's what I'm going to do. Wickham looked at the scotch like it might actually be poisoned, looked at Karen like he was seeing her for the first time. You spent your whole life believing power came from fear, she continued, from violence, from making people too scared to challenge you. You mocked me that night because you saw me as powerless, just a waitress, someone beneath your notice. She took another sip of her drink. But you were wrong. True power isn't making people fear you, it's making them underestimate you while you dismantle everything they've built. You taught me that, actually. 3 years ago, when you killed Michael because you thought we didn't see you coming. Wickham's hand dropped to the table, gun still in his grip but no longer aimed. He looked exhausted, hollowed out, like a man finally understanding the full weight of his choices. So what now? His voice was rough. You turn me in? I'm dead either way. Prison or the families I betrayed. They'll get to me eventually. Yes, Karen said simply. You are. But here's the difference between us. I'm giving you a choice. You can shoot me right now, try to run, die in some alley like the men you've killed, or you can put down the gun, face what you've done, and spend whatever time you have left, understanding that the empire you built on fear was always going to end exactly like this, alone, betrayed, by your own paranoia. Silence stretched between them. Wickham stared at the gun in his hand, looked at Karen, looked at the empty restaurant that had been his kingdom. Slowly, he set the weapon on the table. You want me to live with it, he said. That's your revenge, making me face what I've done. No, Karen's voice softened. I want you to learn from it. I want you to understand that every person you dismissed, every nobody you mocked, they were all human, with power you never saw, and one of them took you down. The FBI came through the doors then, Marcus Stone leading, young agents with their weapons drawn, surrounding Wickham before he could change his mind. They cuffed him, read his rights, treated him like any other criminal instead of the ghost who'd haunted Chicago for 3 decades. As they led him toward the door, Wickham looked back at Karen one last time. The waitress won, he said, and something that might have been respect flickered in his eyes. I'll be damned. Karen stood alone at table 7, watching him disappear into federal custody. You were damned the moment you thought you were untouchable, she whispered to the empty room. This is what justice looks like when you choose it over revenge. Wickham's going to prison, but he's going to live with what he did. And Karen, she gets to go home to her daughter, knowing she didn't become the monster she was hunting. If this story has moved you, if you understand that real strength is choosing mercy when you have every right to vengeance, then drop a comment, hit subscribe right now, and stay with me, because there's one more chapter to this story, the epilogue, where we see what happens when you choose to heal instead of harm. Don't go anywhere. We're almost home. The trial lasted 6 weeks. Karen testified on day 12, her face obscured by screens, her voice filtered through software that made her unrecognizable. She laid out 3 years of evidence, recordings, financial documents, witness testimony that connected Joseph Wickham to 17 murders, including Michael Chen's. The defense tried to discredit her, called her a rogue agent with a vendetta, suggested she'd manufactured evidence to settle a personal score. But the evidence spoke for itself. Bodies buried in construction sites, financial records showing decades of money laundering, testimony from Tommy DeMarco, who'd negotiated immunity in exchange for everything he knew about Wickham's operations. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. Guilty, on all counts. Life sentence, no possibility of parole. Several judges went down with him, 2 police captains, a city councilman who'd been on Wickham's payroll for 15 years. The investigation cracked open corruption that had been festering in Chicago's institutions for decades. $40 million in seized assets went to a victim restitution fund.
Families who'd lost everything to Wickham's loan sharking got their homes back. Small businesses destroyed by his extortion received compensation. It didn't undo the damage, but it was something. A start. The FBI offered to reinstate Catherine Reynolds with full honors, promotion, back pay, a formal apology for the way they'd handled her after Michael's death. Karen declined. She was done being an agent, done hunting monsters. She wanted to be human again, or learn how to be after 3 years of becoming something else. Vincent Greco was buried in a cemetery on the south side. Karen visited on a cold Thursday morning when she knew she'd be alone. Brought flowers, white roses because she didn't know what else to bring to apologize for orchestrating someone's death. His widow was there anyway, Maria Greco, 53 years old, kneeling at her husband's grave with mud on her knees and grief carved into every line of her face. Karen almost left, almost walked away before Maria could see her, but running felt like cowardice, and she'd already committed enough sins without adding that one. Mrs. Greco? Maria looked up, recognized her from the trial, the anonymous witness who'd helped destroy Wickham. You're the FBI agent. Was. Karen knelt beside her, set the roses against the headstone. I'm so sorry. Your husband died because of me, because I used him as a weapon against Wickham. He was innocent, and I knew it, and I killed him anyway. Maria was silent for a long time. Then she reached over and took Karen's hand. My husband chose this life. He knew the risks. He knew the men he worked for, the violence that came with it. Her voice broke. But thank you for stopping Wickham before more families were destroyed, before more widows had to bury their husbands. Karen wanted to tell her the truth, that Vincent had been loyal, that he died for nothing except her need for revenge. But some guilt was too heavy to share, and some confessions only served to ease the confessor's burden while adding to someone else's pain. So she squeezed Maria's hand, stayed with her until the sun started setting, left without saying the words that would have made her feel better, but would have destroyed the small comfort Maria had built around her husband's death. Marcus found her at a coffee shop 3 blocks away, sat down across from her without asking permission, ordered 2 cups neither of them would finish. You won, he said after a while. Wickham's in prison. Corrupt officials are being prosecuted. Victims are getting restitution. You did what Michael couldn't. I killed an innocent man to do it. Yes, you did. And now you get to carry that for the rest of your life. That's the cost. Karen stared into her coffee. I looked in the mirror Wickham used, saw the same monster. But you chose not to become one. That's the difference. Marcus leaned forward. You could have killed him, Kate. Could have made it look like an accident or self-defense. Could have walked away clean. But you chose mercy instead. Gave him to the law. That's the hardest thing a warrior can do. Choose restraint when you have the right to vengeance. Does that make it right, what I did to Vincent? No. It makes you human. We carry the weight of our choices, the good ones and the terrible ones. That's how we stay human, by remembering what we've done and choosing to be better anyway.
Karen legally changed her name, became Karen Taylor permanently. Not because she was hiding anymore, but because Catherine Reynolds felt like someone who died 3 years ago in that warehouse alongside Michael. She used the reward money to open a small victim advocacy center. 1 room, 2 desks, a phone line that connected to legal aid and social services and trauma counselors who understood that healing from violence took more than time. She named it the Chen Morrison Center, for Michael, who taught her what justice should look like, for Vincent, whose death she'd carry until her own. Her first client was Maria Greco, who needed help navigating death benefits and insurance policies that tried to deny coverage when a spouse died in criminal circumstances. Karen helped her fight. 1. Made sure Vincent's sons had something to build futures on besides grief in their father's choices. Lily started asking questions after the trial. 8 years old, hearing whispers at school about her mother helping catch a dangerous man. Karen picked her up one afternoon, drove to the park they used to visit before everything got complicated, sat on the swings and tried to explain the unexplainable. "Did you really catch a bad man, Mommy?" "I did, baby." "Were you scared?" Terrified, Karen pushed off gently, letting the swing carry her. "But I learned something important. Being a hero isn't about winning or being brave. It's about choosing to do the right thing even when it's hard, even when you're scared, even when the cost is higher than you want to pay." Lily was quiet, processing. "Was it hard?" "The hardest thing I've ever done." Karen stopped the swing, pulled her daughter close. "But I'd do it again. Because sometimes the right choice isn't the easy one, and sometimes protecting people means doing things that hurt." She visited Michael's grave one last time before closing that chapter entirely. Sarah's name was beside his now, buried 6 months after the trial, finally at peace, or at least at rest. Karen knelt between them, left flowers for both, a letter she'd written the night before, sealed in an envelope that would dissolve in the first rain. "I kept my promise," she whispered, touching Michael's headstone. "But not the way I thought I would, not the way you would have wanted. I became something darker to get here, something I'm not proud of. But Wickham's in prison, his victims have justice, and I'm trying to be human again." She touched Sarah's name. "I'm sorry I couldn't save you. Sorry justice came too late. Your kids are with your sister now. They're okay. They'll be okay. That's something, right?" The wind carried her words away. No answer came, but she hadn't expected one. Wickham received the newspaper clipping 3 months into his sentence, article about the Chen Morrison Center, the work it was doing, the families it was helping heal. Inside the folded paper was a handwritten note on plain white paper, 2 sentences and handwriting he'd seen on order slips for 3 years without ever really noticing. "Sometimes the people you dismiss are the ones who change everything. You taught me to be invisible. I taught you to see. K.T." He sat on his bunk in the small cell that would be his home until he died, stared at that note for a long time, felt something he hadn't experienced in decades. Regret. Not for getting caught, for what he'd done to earn it. For Vincent, loyal for 20 years. For Michael Chen, who died trying to stop him. For all the nameless, faceless people he'd destroyed while building an empire that lasted less time than some of them had loved their families. The Chen Morrison Center held workshops twice a week. Karen taught them herself. Practical advice on navigating legal systems, recognizing manipulation, and rebuilding after trauma. The room was full that Tuesday evening. 20 people, all carrying different weights, all trying to figure out how to be whole again after violence had taken pieces of them. Karen stood at the front of the room, no longer invisible, no longer hiding, just herself, flawed and healing and honest about both. Someone once mocked me, asked me for life advice because he thought I was nobody, just a waitress, someone powerless who couldn't possibly teach him anything. She told them about Wickham, about power and fear and the illusion of control, about being underestimated and turning that invisibility into strength. "But here's the most important lesson," she said, meeting eyes around the room. "When you have the chance to destroy someone who hurt you, when you have the power to become the monster they were, choose differently. Choose mercy, choose wisdom, choose to break the cycle."
She paused. Let that sink in. Because anyone can destroy. That's easy. That's what broken people do. But it takes real strength, real power to choose healing over harm, to choose building over burning, to choose forgiveness over revenge. The workshop ended with applause, with people approaching her afterward, sharing their own stories, asking questions about how to survive what felt unsurvivable. Karen saw a young woman in the back row, 20-something, tired eyes, taking notes intently. When their eyes met, the woman smiled, small, tentative, but real. Karen smiled back. Through the window, Chicago's skyline glowed against the setting sun. A new day ending, another one coming. "My name is Karen Taylor," she said to the empty room after everyone had left. "I used to be someone who hunted monsters. Now I help people heal from them. And that's a power no one can take away." She locked the door, went home to Lily, started healing. Real power isn't found in fear or violence. It's in choosing mercy when revenge feels justified, in breaking cycles instead of perpetuating them, and in understanding that the people you underestimate may be the ones who change everything. Sometimes justice comes with a cost you'll carry forever, and the hardest part of being human is living with the weight of your choices while still choosing to be better. Every year, thousands of people are affected by organized crime. If you or someone you know needs help, resources are available. You are not powerless. You are not alone. If this story moved you, if it made you think about power, justice, and the cost of revenge, then it served its purpose. Drop a comment about what this story meant to you, and subscribe now, because stories like this, stories that don't shy away from complexity and consequence, those are the ones that deserve to be heard. Thank you for staying with Karen's journey from beginning to end. Thank you for witnessing her pain, her choices, and her healing. That's what makes these stories matter. You, listening, understanding, carrying forward the lesson that mercy is always stronger than vengeance.